Good afternoon. I'm Pastor Clark from St. Paul Lutheran Church in Clinton, Iowa, and we're going to do a little Bible study. There's two readings appointed for this coming Sunday that I want to look at. First, the Gospel from Matthew 10, and a first reading from Matthew 28. These kind of go hand in hand, so let's look at them together. So I'm going to go ahead and read the whole Matthew 10 reading and then go back and talk a little bit about it, what I noticed. So Jesus says, he's talking to the disciples, the 12. There's a kind of a much longer section here that he's sending out the 12, choosing the 12, sending out the 12. So he's kind of like preparing them for the work that he's sending them out to do, the mission of God that they are imitating Jesus in doing. And these are kind of like Jesus's last words here from a long section, like mostly chapter 10 of talking to his disciples, sending them out. All right, so Jesus says to the disciples, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person in the name of a righteous person," or let me give that to you again, whoever welcomes a just person in the name of a just person, just meaning justice, will receive the reward of the righteous or the just. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water to these little ones in the name of a disciple, really, I'm telling you, none of these will lose their reward. All right, so last week we heard another little, the section right before this, which was more of Jesus's kind of instruction and teaching to his disciples before he sent them out. And we heard this little bit about a sparrow. Aren't two sparrows sold for 1 penny, or is it 1 penny sold for 1 sparrow sold for 2 pennies anyway? How much more value are you to God? It was basically Jesus's message. And, so if we stop and think about a message of how precious life is to Jesus, how precious life is to God, the life of sparrows, the life of people, and especially in this context here, as how precious are the lives of those whom God sends to proclaim God's message. I mean, hold on to that. How precious are these lives? How precious are these people? Here is a passage about how precious are people's lives. So that's the kind of overall context of this. How precious are these lives? How precious is life? I mean, first of all, to remind those whom Jesus is sending out, who's got your back? It's not just Jesus, it's God, It's the whole experience, the whole Jesus and God and everything, right? It's got your back. So that's how precious these ones are, whom Jesus sends out, that God's got their back. I mean, I think there's also a little bit of a, call it a warning or a reminder, of keeping our lives in alignment with the one who sent us, right? I've been to trainings that we identify very specifically who sent you to this training. That's who you are accountable to. So if you're wasting your time while you're here and not engaging in this training, then you're wasting the time and resources of the one who sent you, okay? Jesus doesn't put that fine a point on it, but there is that kind of reminder that we are accountable to the one who sent us. And with that accountability comes, like I said, God's got your back. Jesus has your back. So there's this intimate relationship with Jesus, with God, that Jesus is making sure that those Jesus sends understand how much their lives matter, how much the ups and downs of the work that they're doing, of putting out a message of love into the world, how much that matters, how much they matter. Okay, so that's just verse 1. All right, so then this business about welcoming prophets. We're gonna just an aside, we're gonna look at Jeremiah 28 to dig deeper into what it means to be a prophet. That'll be good. But let's stop and notice that the mission that God's mission that Jesus invites the disciples to participate in, sends them to further, this is wrapped up with the mission of the prophets. So this is a generations and generations long mission. It didn't start with Jesus. It continues in Jesus. It unfolds perhaps for some of us in a more obvious way. But the mission of the disciples is the mission of the prophets. That's what when whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet, maybe a weird way of saying whoever welcomes a prophet because they are a prophet. Okay, so this welcome is it's both very concrete in terms of its hospitality. Whoever shows hospitality, when Jesus says whoever welcomes you, it's whoever shows hospitality to you. Whoever welcomes a prophet, whoever shows hospitality to prophets. That'll get even clearer in the next verses. And does that because they are a prophet. You know? Okay, so you got that. What else? I wanted to say something else about that. I'm checking my notes here. It's also faith in the message. You know, there's that. It's both welcoming includes both hospitality, so giving people a place to stay, food to eat, encouragement along the way, hospitality, and faith in the message. That means they're believing in the message, they're investing in the message, they're trusting the message. That's everything that's wrapped up in the welcome. Okay. Whoever welcomes a righteous person. Now, you heard me while I was reading it. Amend the word. So the word behind righteous can be translated in more than one way. And I actually have a bias, which is why I made the amendment. It could be righteous or just in terms of justice. Someone who lives right is kind of what Jesus is suggesting. Someone who's involved in the work of justice is what Jesus is suggesting, because that's all encapsulated in the Greek word, the original Greek word that's translated righteous. So you'll receive the reward of the just person by giving the hospitality, investing in the message, trusting the message. And that again just reaffirms the mission of the prophets is the mission of Jesus, is the mission of the disciples, right? There's drawing a line of continuity. And let me finish this off a little bit and then come back and wrap another little bow on it. And whoever gives even a cup of cold water. So there you go. There's a concrete act of hospitality, giving a cup of cold water to a hot, thirsty disciple. Okay, to even one of these little ones, in the name of a disciple, meaning because they are a disciple. Really, I tell you, none of these will lose their reward. There's a way in which Jesus is saying to the disciples who are going to be essentially itinerant preachers and wonder workers, healers like Jesus was, exercising God's power, creating community everything that Jesus was doing before, what Jesus is essentially saying to these ones who he's sending out, pay attention to the people who receive you. Pay attention to the people who serve you. They are blessed. There's no hierarchy here. Their lives and contributions matter just as much as yours do. There's one way to receive what Jesus is saying here. That everyone can participate in God's mission, even if we are not the ones who are going out to seek a welcome, and both for our bodies and for our message. But those who receive us, who invest in that mission, are also participating in the mission. Those lives, those bodies, those investments matter as well. So it's kind of, it can be kind of a warning, notice who, a warning to be, humble is not the right word, but to not put yourself above, right? This is not a superiority game. Jesus does not send them out with word and power and authority in order for them to lord it over others. Instead, it's Jesus affirming the value of all life, and this mission that is about affirming the value of all life, that there is a mutuality and an honoring of those who honor you. If they honor you, honor them, is part of what I hear in this message, as well as just an extending, saying that there's more than one way to participate in this mission of God. Both the ones who are sent and the ones who do the receiving participate in the mission of God. Okay, and so part of what I just hear loud and clear is the word whoever. Whoever. Jesus does not care about labels, about quote unquote conversion or church going. That's not Jesus's concern. He's concerned about blessing people, affirming people's lives, empowering people, and speaking very clearly about it doesn't matter what your label is, your nationality, what tribe, or whatever you belong to. If you receive, whoever welcomes you welcomes me, right? Okay, none of them will lose their reward, no matter who they are. This is a wide blessing, affirming all kinds of people, right? It's participation in the mission of God is what Jesus is affirming here, and there's lots of ways to participate. All right. Okay, so I think that covers Matthew 10 pretty well. Let's move on and talk about Jeremiah 28 a little bit. And again, the connection here is prophet. What does it mean to be a prophet? What does it mean that Jesus is the mission of Jesus and his disciples? The mission of God has been the mission of the prophets from old, even in Jesus's time, the prophets were ancient, right? So let's get a sense of the scale of this mission of God and not get so, again, play a superiority game like we are so great, we Christians, we people of this present moment, but notice the long investment that God is making into affirming life, holding precious the life of God's creation. Okay, so that's why we're going to look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a prophet, and here we go. Then the prophet Jeremiah spoke to the prophet Hananiah in the presence of the priests and all the people who were standing in the house of the Lord. A big theme of the prophet of Jeremiah is true versus false prophets. And so notice in that opening verse, there are two prophets who are named. Okay, this is kind of setting up a conflict in a sense, because these are dueling prophets. They have different messages. Okay, and yeah. Now, So Jesus, what part of the message of the prophet is how do we discern true prophets from false prophets? Very useful in the world today when lots of people are saying different things, opposing things. Their messages are at odds, okay? And before I go any further, maybe let's just stop and talk about what a prophet is. You can go back and look at Jeremiah chapter 1. This tells the story of God calling Jeremiah. And one thing to notice, there's many things to notice, but the first thing I want to notice is God puts God's word in Jeremiah's mouth, right? So a prophet is someone who God has chosen to speak for God. Okay, it's a high calling. Maybe you can feel the weight of that, the weightiness of it, the importance of it, the responsibility. The next thing is that Jeremiah resists. Jeremiah protests. God says, "I'm just a boy," and God says, "Well, I choose you anyway." And so another thing to notice about the prophets is the prophets are very rarely those who are authorized by society, human beings. They are kind of marginal in some way. So here Jeremiah is marginal because of his youth. God chooses him anyway. Okay, so somebody who speaks from God, somebody who's marginal in some way relative to the standards of society of that time and place. And then the last thing is what God says to Jeremiah, giving him authority over, let me get this right, nations and kingdoms, and then there's three pairs of words here: to pluck up and pull down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. Now I see that in some way as a kind of a progression. That will really tie in what Jeremiah is about to say. We'll see in Jeremiah 28. There is a destruction creation, kind of a dialectic in what God has given the prophet to do, prophet Jeremiah. There's a kind of you can call it a death or resurrection cycle. The prophet is to initiate that, is to be a catalyst of that in the nation, in the society that the prophet's in, okay? So that there's an adaptive change that God's calling for from a whole people. So the prophet is addressing not just individuals, but whole people. His audience is a nation and its leaders. That message is basically one of a deep and transformative change for the nation and society as a whole. Okay, I'm just pulling this right out of the Bible. So, if we step back and look at the prophets as a whole and not just Jeremiah, what we see is that the prophets are some of the, even in the history of the world, some of the sharpest critics of injustice in society. Okay, they are champions, as they are critics. They are also champions of God's vision of shalom. Now, that's a Hebrew word. It encapsulates this sense of love and justice and peace, this sense of community, wholeness and healing, this sense of home, of return, which is a big part of Jeremiah's message. The word captivity is right off the bat in the first few verses. That is a living reality for the nation of Israel at the time. It's about freedom, liberation. This transformation is. And it's about God's love for the world, God's affirmation of life, holding life as precious, including those whom humans put down as not precious. Okay? I hope you're hearing what I'm saying. Okay? And here we have in Jeremiah 28 a kind of a confrontation between a true prophet, Jeremiah, and a false prophet. Okay, and that's where we saw the introduction of that. And then in verse 6, the prophet Jeremiah said, "Amen. May the Lord do so. May the Lord fulfill the words that you, Hananiah, have prophesied, and bring back to this place from Babylon the vessels of the house of the Lord and all the exiles. So we kind of pick up in the middle of a conversation here. We don't hear what the prophet Hananiah has said, but it's kind of, we can kind of see its mirror image in what Jeremiah says. Jeremiah says, God, I hope what you have said is true, Hananiah. Now, just there's a but coming, okay? But in verse 7, but he is responding to what the prophet Hananiah has said. Jeremiah is. And the context of what he says, there's kind of some symbolic language here, but in the history of Israel, so after Israel is liberated from Egypt, they have their own land. This is all in the Bible. They have their own land. Then there is this great superpower, Babylon, much larger and more powerful than puny Israel in the scale of the world. Partly, the prophets call this out, partly due to Israel not trusting God and putting faith in their own ability to manipulate other world leaders and form alliances and kind of curry favor with the powerful. Babylon attacks, destroys Israel, Jerusalem, takes captive lots of people from Israelites, just takes them back to Babylon, where they can serve the empire of Babylon. Okay, so apparently what the prophet Hananiah has said is that God's going to bring them all home. It's going to be okay. Okay, and Jeremiah says in verse 6, I hope you're right. But maybe you can hear his skepticism because in verse 10, but listen now to this word that I speak in your hearing and the hearing of all the people. I mean, Jeremiah wants to be heard, knows that he's speaking a message that's at odds with this other so-called prophet, and goes on to say, verse 8, the prophets who preceded you, the prophets who came before you, Hananiah, who came before me, from ancient times, going way back, prophesied war, famine, and pestilence against many countries and great kingdoms. As for the prophet who prophesies peace, which is Hananiah, that's what Hananiah has prophesied. In fact, there's another part of Jeremiah when Jeremiah says, peace, peace, but there is no peace. All the prophets around him are saying, peace, oh, everything's okay. It's going to be fine. Don't worry. Jeremiah says, there is no peace. Here's what Jeremiah says now. As for the prophet who prophesies peace, you, Hananiah, when the word of that prophet comes true, then it will be known that the Lord has truly sent the prophet. Show me the peace, is what Jeremiah is saying. Show me the peace, and then I'll say that you are speaking the word of the Lord. That's what Jeremiah is challenging his message of peace, is saying that the prophets from of old have had a message of war, famine, and pestilence. They've brought bad news. They've brought a warning to countries and kingdoms. And so if you're going to prophesy peace, you got to show me the peace, or else I'm not going to believe that the Lord really sent you as a true prophet. Okay? He's making a case for himself because his message is a message of a war, famine, and pestilence. At first, notice that when God called Jeremiah, he gave a message that is one of plucking up and pulling down, destroying and overthrowing. All of that comes before a message that's about building and planting. when there's a warning, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I liken this to all the people who are protesting police brutality. They're not saying, hey, there's lots of peace around here and everything's going to be great. They're saying there's a real problem. There's violence, and it's bad. The people who say, climate change is real and we have, a very short period of time, maybe a decade, maybe 6 years in which to make radical change in the way our society lives. They have a message of warning, of destruction, of how bad, literally famine and pestilence is part of the message, and war, honestly, war over water and over refugees. That's literally the message of people who are talking about climate. Okay? It's the people who are, hey, everything's fine here. Don't worry about it. It's all going to be good. Those are the people to be suspicious of. Those are the people that the prophet Jeremiah was suspicious of. Okay? So I'll just leave it as a question to you about what do you learn about the mission of Jesus, about God's mission through Jesus and through the disciples and therefore through us, if that's what Jeremiah's mission is all about. Okay? Yeah, whoever welcomes you welcomes me. So thank you. I've had a fun time spending some time with you. I hope God blesses you to bring a good word, whether you're in a pulpit or not. Your sharing the message matters. Pay attention to those who receive you and serve you. They matter too, to God's mission in the world. All right? Peace, true peace, the peace that Jeremiah is talking about, the peace that comes after the conflict and the warning. That's the peace that I hope for you. Bye-bye.